Well, time for the View look at the opinion pages of today's newspapers. And in The Guardian, just as he told Sky News last week, the former Prime Minister Gordon Brown explains why he thinks citizens' assemblies are the only way to break the Brexit deadlock. Elsewhere in the newspaper, their roaming correspondent, John Harris, warns that there's a growing appetite amongst the English for a no-deal Brexit. He points out that the idea of no deal got a roar of approval on last week's BBC Question Time. Former Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson makes the same point at the end of his weekly Daily Telegraph column. He also insists that the Prime Minister can yet unite her party by ditching the backstop. Below Mr Johnson's columns, some good news for Mrs May. Warm words from the Prime Minister of New Zealand, Jacinta Ardern, who says her country is ready to form an ambitious free trade agreement with the UK, no matter what happens with Brexit. No further details are forthcoming. Mr Johnson gets a mention in Claire Foge's piece in The Times, in which she calls for party discipline and accuses MPs of self-obsession. And in the I newspaper, Ian Birrell writes that although the idea of a snap election should be a bad joke, the Tories may just call one in the belief that Jeremy Corbyn can't win. As for the cartoons, The Guardian shows Theresa May doing anything but taking back control, sitting lonely on the front bench. Neither is she in control in The Telegraph, where she's taken Prince Philip's place at the steering wheel. And in The Times, she insists in listening in spite of plugging her ears with red lines. Well, joining me to go through those today are the Telegraph columnist Juliet Samuel and Sonia Sodha, who's chief leader writer at The Observer newspaper. Welcome to you both. Let's start with Ian Birrell. I mean, lots of sort of mutterings about another general election. Do either of you think it's a runner, Sonia?
As you say, there were mutterings, but I'm very sceptical about whether we're going to see a general election. I think if you look at what Conservative MPs are thinking at the moment, yes, Labour may not be doing as well in the polls given the absolute chaos we're seeing in Parliament at the moment as you might expect. But I think MPs, perhaps if there hadn't been a general election just 19 months ago where Theresa May had lost a majority, it might be more on the cards. But I think MPs will look at what happened there. I think Theresa May will be looking at what happened there. And I think they will think it's just too big a risk. There are Tory MPs who don't want to be losing their seats. Labour isn't doing as well as you might expect, but neither is it trailing 10 points behind the Conservatives. Labour's got many more party members on the ground, ready to go canvassing if there is a general election. So I can't see it being a route that the Prime Minister or MPs choose to go down.
What do you reckon, Julia? I mean, the problem is the fact that Mrs May's denying it is seen as confirmation that it's quite likely based on 2017.
Well, I think that we could end up with a general election almost by accident if essentially Parliament breaks down and decides the government isn't going to do what it wants and we have a vote of no confidence. But I really don't think it's something that Number 10 wants. It's a slightly helpful spectre to have out there because, you know, maybe it will bring a few rebels round, because I think the idea is regarded with some horror in most Conservative circles because they know they're in absolutely no state to go into a general election. They're on the cusp of splitting, and the idea that this party could present a united front or any kind of leadership in an election scenario is totally fanciful.
Except if she sticks to a hard Brexit or a no-deal Brexit pattern, she might be able to hold the party together just far enough as the polls.
I'm not sure about that, actually, because I think this is a dilemma that faces her. There seems to be nothing she can do to hold her party together. I think if she went down a sort of much harder Brexit route, which is obviously what some people in her party would like, there are going to be people in the cabinet who would be absolutely horrified about that and who will resign. So it's sort of a bit like, you know, there are these two routes open to her. She can try and get her deal through by working with Labour rebels, for example, by trying to forge a cross-party approach, by softening Brexit, or she can sort of tack to the right and go for the really hard right of her party. But neither of those really allow her to. She loses people whatever action she takes. So it's very hard to see how the Conservative Party could ever reunify around this.
And that really plays into Claire Foge's piece. But, you know, because, I mean, I have to admit, personally, I've been shocked by the indiscipline of MPs, their failure to support a party line. Now, she says it's all down to the fact that we're all become much more self-indulgent and much more feel we have a right to self-expression, and that goes for MPs over party discipline.
I think there is an element of that we've entered a period of our culture that is very much about showing emotion and displaying your outrage and signalling your identity through what you think. So I think that maybe that's a factor, but I think a bigger factor is that we have a minority government and we have a political issue that is causing cracks to appear and fault lines to appear that haven't been there for a long time and causing politics to realign. So those are the real reasons why we're seeing discipline break down. But it is unprecedented. There was a Tory MP said to me last week that his blood was boiling watching his colleagues walk through the lobbies against his government, shaking hands, clapping each other on the back, because in the past this was something
apparently they had a
never
champagne
have done.
party at Jacob Rees-Mogg's house afterwards.
Not sure that's
But
a party I'd have wanted to go to, but I think
that said, Labour is not much more united, is it? Is it the same phenomenon, really, in terms of personality and outlook?
Well, I think we're seeing something different going on in the Labour Party than the Conservative Party. In the Conservative Party, it's very much, Europe is the issue that has divided the Tories in the past. It's come back with a vengeance. Cameron thought he would end this by having a referendum. Actually, he's made the problem a whole lot worse. On the Labour Party, what you've got is a leader who actually is far more Eurosceptic than his members, than many of his MPs. So it's a different sort of division.
Yeah, but his argument is a third of his voters are pretty Eurosceptic. Well.
A third, though. A third. That's, two-thirds. That means two-thirds of them are pretty sort of Europe loving. So I think, it's really interesting with Claire Foger's piece. I think she doesn't quite come out and say this, but all of the examples she uses, men like Boris Johnson and Dominic Raab, I think there is something. I don't think it holds right across the piece. I think if you look at what MPs like Yvette Cooper are doing, Hilary Benn, they are absolutely not motivated by ego. They're motivated by trying to find a route through. On the other side, if you look at the Boris Johnsons, the Dominic Raabs, these men who just, thought that it was all going to be so easy to leave the EU, who they presented a fantasy to the country and then just flounce out of government when it turns out to be a bit harder than they said it was going to be. I think she is right when we're talking about people like Boris Johnson and Dominic Raab. I think there's an incredible amount of ego on that side of politics.
Now, conversely, Jacinda Ardern has been very popular in New Zealand, seen to be a new female breath of fresh air. Is she actually saying much in this article in the Telegraph?
No, politicians' articles never really say very much. But what she is, I think, trying to do is have a little prod, because if the UK gets to a situation where we can strike our own trade deals, then for New Zealand to have a trade deal with the UK will be a bonanza, because our economy is many times their size, and it would be a sort of reversal of what happened in the 70s when we effectively left them out in the cold and went into
on the other hand, a previous New Zealand Prime Minister, I was at a talk by him, and he said, look, back when Britain joined the EU, we did 97% of our trade with the UK. Today we do 3% of our trade with the UK, and most of it with China. So are they that bothered?
I think so, yeah. I think it would be, just the size of the economy, the cultural links, I think there would be a massive outgrowth in trade. And also TPP, the big Pacific trade deal, started as a bilateral between New Zealand and Singapore. So you can actually get to large outcomes through small beginnings.
I think this is very much New Zealand making a pitch to us, almost the other way around. If you look at New Zealand, we do have good links to them, but let's face it, they're a really small economy on the other side of the world, which is really important when it comes to trading relationships. They represent a tiny fraction of Britain's imports and exports to the world. Yes, it would be good to see some growth there, but there is no way that it is going to make up for a dip in trade that we might see with the EU if there were more friction in our trading relationships with the EU. So New Zealand isn't going to save us. It'd be great for them if they did a bit more trade with us, but there's absolutely no way that they can ride in and, together with other countries that people talk about, like Australia, our most important trading partner is with the EU.
But I thought it was quite interesting that Jacinda Ardern, who after all is on the left, is kind of writing the Telegraph and trying to make basically helpful noises towards Mrs May, who of course is a Conservative.
Well, she's trying to make helpful noises to push us away from the idea of signing ourselves up to a customs union, which would obviously preclude any kind of trade deal with New Zealand. So left or right, essentially politicians end up with an inexorable logic representing their country's interests, usually.
OK, thank you both very much indeed. Look forward to seeing you in the next hour. You're watching All Out Politics. Coming up next, Will Mrs May's plan B be enough to change the minds of MPs? And if not, what next?